Tonight, we begin with something both ancient and oddly familiar. Not kings or conquests or flood myths, but play, joy, the laughter of children echoing through dusty alleyways, past ziggurats and canal walls, in a world that smelled like clay, grain, and goat. But here's the strange part. Buried beneath centuries of soil and sand, archaeologists found them, tiny objects, perfectly smooth marbles, clay figurines with oversized heads, miniature carts, game boards with carved squares and tokens worn soft from use. Not religious relics, not symbols of power, toys. Because yes, even in the cradle of civilization, among the scribes and shepherds, gods and empires, children played. And what they played with and how they played might just rewrite what we think we know about ancient life. Before we start, like the video if you're into this sort of thing. The soft kind of history, the forgotten footnotes. And let me know in the comments what time it is where you are, and if you ever played a game your grandparents didn't understand. Now, dim the lights. Maybe light a candle if you're feeling extra ancient. Let the hum of your fan become the desert wind, and imagine, just for a moment, that you're not in your bed in 2025. You're in Ur, or Lagash, or Nippur, and you're 8 years old. There are no screens, no plastic, no algorithm to keep you glued, but you're never bored. The world was your game board. Children in Mesopotamia weren't confined to bedrooms full of action figures or fenced-in playgrounds. Their world was the playground. Open courtyards, canals, dusty fields between sun-baked mud brick homes. And the first rule of Mesopotamian childhood? If you can shape it, you can play with it. The most common material? Clay. Ubiquitous, sticky, and full of potential. Kids made dolls from it, animals, warriors, chariots. Imagine Play-Doh, but with a religious undertone and less supervision. They'd mold dogs, horses, and even cows with exaggerated features, giant eyes, stubby legs, and then parade them through imaginary villages. Clay figures weren't just for fun. Sometimes they were buried as offerings. Other times they were left behind in corners like forgotten action figures of the divine. Small wheels were added to clay carts. Thin reeds became axles. Some even had little strings to pull them, miniature chariots for miniature empires. And yes, these kids lived in a world of empires, Akkadian, Sumerian, Babylonian. But they were still kids, and kids know how to turn anything into a game. Dirt, stones, sticks, a pile of old goat bones? You're halfway to a game of chance. But let's back up. Meet the first board gamers. Long before Monopoly, before chess, before anyone flipped a table over a lost game of Settlers of Catan, there was the royal game of Ur. Sounds fancy, and it was. But also, it was fun. Discovered in a royal tomb by British archaeologist Sir Leonard Woolley in the 1920s, the royal game of Ur is a 4,500-year-old board game that might just be the ancient world's answer to backgammon. The board itself was small, maybe a foot long, decorated with shell and lapis lazuli. But replicas made from wood or clay, that's what the kids got. The rules? We're not entirely sure, but thanks to a Babylonian tablet written in cuneiform, a literal instruction manual from 177 BC, we have a pretty good idea. You race your pieces to the end, trying to avoid being sent back by your opponent. A blend of strategy, luck, and mild sibling betrayal. A perfect game for families or future priests. It wasn't just royalty who played. Archaeological digs in ordinary homes found rougher versions scratched into stone or mud brick. Kids would play with pebbles for pieces. Dice were sometimes knuckle bones, thrown in the air with a snap, clack, rattle. It wasn't Vegas, but it was the beginning. Some researchers believe kids might have played these games not just for fun, but to practice decision-making, memorization, and even divination, because in Mesopotamia, every throw of the dice might be a whisper from the gods. Marbles, dolls, and a strange little hobby called spinning. If you grew up playing marbles, congratulations! You're participating in a 5,000-year-old tradition. Archaeologists have found perfectly spherical clay marbles in cities like Ur and Babylon, sometimes nestled in what might have been courtyards near the skeletons of small fires. Were they used to hit other marbles? To count? To wager? Maybe all of the above. Ancient kids weren't picky. And dolls? Oh yes. Not the porcelain kind. These were sturdy, often faceless, sometimes jointed, always hand-molded. Some had real hair. Others had little bead necklaces. A few were found with tiny beds made of reeds, which tells us something important. Even in the shadow of temples and tyrants, kids like to tuck their dolls in at night. But perhaps the most Mesopotamian of toys was the humble spinning top, made of clay, perfectly balanced, and often engraved with simple patterns. You'd twist the string, let it go, and watch it wobble across the dusty floor like a drunken ziggurat. There's a quiet satisfaction to imagining a kid in 2300 BC grinning at a top doing what physics demands, dancing in circles until it tips and falls. Just like now. The sounds of ancient play. What did play sound like in ancient Mesopotamia? Not the beeps and buzzes of electronic devices, but laughter, sure, the occasional ouch from a game gone wrong, but also the clack of dice on stone, the scrape of reed sticks, the soft thud of a clay ball hitting a mud brick wall, and flutes, real ones. Some children played music, reeds and flutes shaped for small fingers, not just for ritual, but for joy, for noise, for the kind of sound that makes the goats nervous and the adults sigh. Ancient lullabies even survive in cuneiform form, tiny songs sung to restless children, which means somewhere a Mesopotamian mother hummed a tune while her child drifted to sleep, maybe holding a doll missing one arm. Some things don't change. Next time we'll dive into the weird things kids believed, curses, monsters, and why losing a toy might mean your soul was in danger. For now, drift easy knowing this. 5,000 years ago, children laughed. They played. They threw clay balls at their siblings and invented their own fun without a single screen. History isn't always kings and plagues. Sometimes it's just a child, barefoot in the dust, spinning a top, and watching it fall. Previously, we wandered through ancient Mesopotamian courtyards and uncovered toys made of clay, games of strategy and chance, and the hum of a child's world spinning on a top. But what if I told you that childhood in Mesopotamia wasn't just about laughter? It was also a little spooky. Because in the land between the Tigris and Euphrates, fun didn't stop at dolls and marbles. It tiptoed into superstition, into omens, into things that went bump in the reed-thatched night. Welcome to the second chapter of Mesopotamian childhood, where even tag might involve a demon. Curses, ghosts, and why you shouldn't whisper in the dark. Imagine this. You're 8 years old, it's dusk in Babylon, and you've just lost your favorite figurine, your best one, the one with painted eyes and a tiny copper staff. You're convinced someone stole it. Or worse, maybe a ghost took it. You don't cry. You whisper to the air, "Numtaru, bring it back." And then you run, because even saying his name might call him. In Mesopotamian culture, children didn't grow up believing the world was safe. They believed it was inhabited by spirits, monsters, and forgotten gods with complicated moods. Adults feared them, and children played with them, sort of. Some ancient Mesopotamian games were centered around superstition. Kids reenacted battles between gods and demons, pretending to exorcise spirits by shouting phrases they'd heard from temple priests. They'd drop protective signs in the dirt with sticks, believing it kept away evil. They invented chants, rhymes, and what we'd now call playground magic. But it wasn't all pretend. If your doll broke in half, that might be an omen. If your clay top spun too long, some kids thought it meant a spirit was nearby, trying to speak. The line between play and ritual was thin, thinner than reed paper in a sandstorm. DIY mythology, the first fan fiction? Mesopotamian kids didn't just passively listen to myths, they acted them out. Picture this, a group of children in a courtyard, acting out the tale of Gilgamesh and Enkidu using handmade puppets. The Bull of Heaven? That's a gourd on a stick. The cedar forest? 3 piles of woven baskets stacked near a wall. Giggles echo as Enkidu dramatically dies, falling onto a straw mat. They weren't reenacting school plays. This was for fun, for imagination, and yes, sometimes for bragging rights. The best Ishtar might get a free date cake from a neighbor. The worst one probably got hit with a reed. We found toy-sized props, daggers, chariots, even little lion-shaped charms that suggest kids were making their own versions of epic tales. Not for grades, not for fame, just to be the hero. Or the monster. Or the moon goddess if it was her turn. Monsters under the bed? Try monsters everywhere. If you think kids today have vivid imaginations, imagine growing up in a world where adults agreed that monsters were real, where demons weren't just bedtime stories, they were potential house guests. Ancient Mesopotamian children were warned about Lamashtu, a she-demon who stole babies and drank blood. Light-hearted, right? Utuku, the angry dead who didn't get proper burials and wandered the earth biting people. Asog, a plague demon said to boil rivers with his breath. Fun. And while adults turned to incantations and temple offerings, children developed their own defense systems. They wore protective amulets, tiny figurines or symbols tied around the neck with bits of wool string. Some wore crude clay pendants shaped like Pazuzu, the demon king of wind who was terrifying but could protect you from worse things. It's like wearing a Freddy Krueger necklace so he doesn't haunt you. Effective? Debatable. Comforting? Absolutely. Hide and seek with a side of existential dread. But not all ancient childhood fun was filled with omens and ghost warnings. Sometimes it was just hide and seek with the Mesopotamian twist. In urban cities like Uruk and Akkad, homes were tightly packed with narrow alleyways, shaded courtyards, and hidden nooks perfect for sneaking, spying, and vanishing mid-giggle. Kids played what archaeologists believe were variations of chase games, tag, hide and seek, or something halfway between both and mild stalking. One fragmentary tablet even refers to a game called el-lutu, which some scholars think was a mix of hide and seek and catch. The rules are lost, but the tone? Suspiciously gleeful. Kids would whisper, el-lutu, before running. And if you were tagged, you didn't just lose, you had to recite a rhyme, often with embarrassing results, like being rickrolled but 4,000 years earlier and with more dust. Sibling rivalry deluxe. Ancient texts are full of prayers, contracts, and temple hymns, but every once in a while you find something juicier, like, "May Nana smite my brother who stole my game stick," found scratched into a clay tablet.
possibly written by a child, possibly written by a very serious child. Because Mesopotamian siblings? Oh, they fought. Archaeological digs have found snapped game pieces, broken toy carts, and one delightfully squashed clay tablet, flattened as though someone very small and very angry stomped on it with all the power of a toddler tantrum. Scholars say children learned early how to share, or fake it. Rules for turn-taking were baked into some board games. Chants were created to determine who goes first, and if that didn't work, well, there was always tattling, or praying that your sibling's goat got possessed. The first pranksters. If you've ever had a sibling hide your shoes, you're not alone. Ancient Mesopotamian kids were apparently into pranks. We know this because of a letter from one scribe apprentice to another, complaining, "Someone placed a goat pellet in my writing tablet box." Translation: someone filled his pencil case with poop. Classic. Kids would rig water pots to spill, smear sticky fig syrup on door handles, tie fake messages and slip them into temple mail slots. Nothing too malicious, just ancient versions of LOL. And yes, they got in trouble for it. Temple schools were strict. Parents even stricter. But there's something kind of sweet about knowing even 5,000 years ago someone was carving "kick me" into the back of a classmate's tablet. Some things are eternal. Coming up in installment 3. In the next chapter, we'll explore the Mesopotamian school system, why kids went, what they learned, and how education was somehow both a privilege and a punishment. Spoiler: Sumerian math was not fun, and neither was memorizing 600 cuneiform signs with your knuckles still covered in reed splinters. But for now, let the dust settle. Tonight we learned that ancient childhood wasn't just innocent play. It was a delicate dance between imagination and anxiety, spirits and secrets, laughter and lurking shadows. Because in Mesopotamia, even playtime had the touch of the divine and the haunted.
So far, we've met the mini charioteers, ghost-fearing marble-mongers, and toddler theologians of ancient Mesopotamia. We've peeked into alleyway games, sibling rivalries, and low-stakes demonic encounters. But now, it's time to talk about something a little more serious. School. Yes, kids in ancient Mesopotamia went to school. But before you imagine backpacks and bells, erase everything you know about modern classrooms. Because education in the land of Sumer and Akkad wasn't about discovering your passion or learning through play. It was about mastering clay tablets, memorizing 600-plus symbols, and praying you didn't mess up a wedge mark. Oh, and getting hit with a stick. Repeatedly. Grab your stylus. We're going to scribal school. The Eduba, where fun went to die. The Mesopotamian school was called the Eduba, meaning tablet house. It sounds quaint. It was not. The Eduba was usually attached to a temple or government complex, and it functioned less like a school and more like an elite boot camp for future scribes. Scribes were the lifeblood of the civilization, recording crops, contracts, hymns, laws, and complaints about noisy neighbors. And becoming one? It started young, really young. Some kids began their training as early as 5 or 6. Their tool set? A stylus carved from reed and a fresh, slightly damp clay tablet. Their job? Write, over and over, until the symbols were perfect, or the tablet cracked, whichever came first. And if you made a mistake, let's just say Mesopotamian teachers were not subscribers to the growth mindset. Stylus, clay, and a healthy dose of fear. Learning cuneiform wasn't like learning the alphabet. It was more like learning 600 alphabets. Each sign had multiple meanings depending on context. Some meant entire words, Others were phonetic syllables, and many of them looked nearly identical, at least to the untrained, tear-filled eye of a child who had just dropped their stylus into a fire pit. Tablets show scribal exercises in progress. Rows of practice glyphs, corrections scrawled beside them, and sometimes delightful doodles. One student, clearly frustrated, carved a stick figure with exaggerated eyebrows. Was it their teacher? A demon? The embodiment of math homework? Unclear. We also have ancient student complaints. One famous tablet features a young scribe bemoaning his lack of lunch, his sore hands, and how often he gets whipped. Because yes, discipline was literal. Teachers carried rods. So did assistants. So did assistants to the assistants. And if your line work was sloppy, or you spoke out of turn, or you sneezed too close to a temple name, smack. Harder still if your father was footing the bill. This was a privilege after all. Education as play, or something like it. Despite the horror stories, there were moments of joy. At least, we assume. Some school tablets have what appear to be jokes, riddles, silly little limericks in cuneiform. One clay tablet describes a donkey giving a lecture. Another pokes fun at a man who forgets to wear pants. The Mesopotamian equivalent of, "Why did the chicken cross the road?" Except the chicken is a goat, and the punchline involves barley. Kids passed these around like memes, shared them after class, scribbled them on discarded tablets when the teacher wasn't looking. We've even found evidence of friendly competition. Scribes racing to copy a hymn perfectly were improvising alternate endings to a well-known proverb. Some Edubai instructors, usually the cooler ones, allowed brief storytelling contests. Loser had to carry water for the week. Think of it as Mesopotamian debate club meets TikTok. Girls in the tablet house? The answer is mostly no, but also sometimes yes. In general, scribal education was reserved for boys from elite families, sons of priests, administrators, merchants. But there are exceptions. Some tablets are signed with female names, suggesting that a few girls, usually daughters of scribes or priestesses, did receive formal training, especially in cities like Sippar or Uruk, where temple complexes had women in powerful positions. These girls became priestesses, librarians, or healers. They copied hymns, calculated star charts, interpreted omens, and occasionally they just wrote. One teenage girl in ancient Lagash wrote a poetic insult so sharp we're still translating it slowly with oven mitts. So while it wasn't common, some Mesopotamian girls absolutely cracked the stylus ceiling and probably did it while rolling their eyes. After school, before dark. Once lessons ended, and assuming you still had all your fingers, there was a brief window before nightfall for fun. Kids would race home, tablets in hand, shoving leftover clay in each other's faces. Some replayed board games with brothers. Others practiced new symbols by scratching them into walls, dirt, or the backs of unfortunate goats. They played a game similar to tug-of-war using braided reeds. They staged mini-dramas about lazy gods and angry bakers. They made jokes about Akkadians, risky but hilarious. And then, as the sun dipped and the lamps were lit, they'd sit with parents or tutors or nosy neighbors and recite what they learned. Literacy was entertainment. Stories were communal. One kid might recite a flood myth while another translated it to a different dialect. And if a child repeated a tale especially well, they were allowed to sleep on the family's softest straw mat. A rare honor, almost as good as being allowed to not feed the chickens in the morning. Mini masters of the universe. In some elite households, children were trained not just to read, but to rule. The sons of nobles and priests practiced not only cuneiform, but diplomacy. They played games of resource management, negotiation, and subtle sabotage. Sound familiar? It's the board game Catan, but with real consequences and less sheep. These games taught them how to handle temples, grain storage, land disputes, and dowry negotiations. Historians call it proto-bureaucratic simulation. We call it, congratulations, you're 9 and already in a middle management role. Some of these games mimicked city building. Others were about assigning offerings to gods. Too much to one deity and you risk famine. Too little and your dad gets demoted. Fun. Next up, festivals, family feasts, and the Mesopotamian version of birthday parties, which may or may not involve live animals, edible wigs, and a prayer to keep your soul attached. But for now, let the wax of the oil lamp flicker and listen closely. You can almost hear it. A reed stylus scratching clay, a soft chant of numbers, and the rustle of a tablet being slid across the floor just out of reach of a younger brother. Because somewhere, 4,000 years ago, a kid just finished his lesson. And tomorrow, he'll do it all again.
So far, we've explored Mesopotamian toys, games, demons, and the surprisingly uncozy boot camp known as school. But no childhood is complete without parties. Yes, parties. Feasts, family celebrations, entire city blowouts where children danced, laughed, gorged on dates, and occasionally ran from sacred goats. Because when Mesopotamians celebrated, they really celebrated. And children? They weren't sidelined. They were often the center of the chaos. Tonight, we light the oil lamps. We hum old hymns. We bake something slightly burned on purpose. And we crash the world's first birthday parties. Bring a goat, trust me. Festivals, the original school holidays. Imagine waking up in the city of Nippur and knowing today is not a school day. Not because you're sick, because it's Akitu. The Akitu festival, also called the Spring Festival or Babylonian New Year, was one of the biggest events on the calendar. It marked the renewal of life, the reaffirmation of the king's divine mandate, and crucially, a multi-day break from routine. That meant no school, no scribal drills, and definitely no stylus to the knuckles. Instead, there were parades, giant ones. Statues of gods were carried through the streets on golden litters. Musicians played lyres, flutes, drums, and something that sounded like a bagpipe if you squinted. Children followed in packs, some chanting hymns, others just chasing snacks. They wore wreaths of reeds, clay amulets shaped like stars, and occasionally bird masks. Why? Because bird masks were festive. Don't overthink it. There were plays performed in open courtyards. Some were religious dramas. Others were mythic comedies, complete with fart jokes and jokes about Akkadians. Still risky, still hilarious. Kids reenacted the stories afterward, turning festival grounds into makeshift stages. One might play Marduk. Another would be Tiamat, the chaos dragon. The smallest child? Always the sacrificial goat. Tradition. Feast days and food comas. At the heart of most Mesopotamian festivities was food. Not modern, low-carb, responsibly sourced food. No, food. Celebration food. That meant fresh flatbreads slattered in honey, date cakes wrapped in fig leaves, goat stew so tender it melted into your dreams, and beer. Not for the kids, but they did dip their fingers in when no one was looking. Children were involved in meal prep, often helping grind flour, fetch water, or pester the cook with 400 questions about the goat. In elite households, they sat at the end of the feast line, nibbling the edge of adult conversations and pretending to enjoy lentils. And yes, there were food fights. We know this because one clay tablet includes a list of festival misbehavior fines. Among them, throwing date paste at temple wall, 3 shekels. Stealing chicken leg from priest's plate, 5 shekels. Laughing during solemn procession, public apology, and goat washing. Children were chaos in sandals. And Mesopotamians, bless them, made room for it. Birthdays. You get a goat, everyone gets a goat. Unlike the modern cake and candle scene, ancient Mesopotamian birthdays were quieter,
more symbolic, and often involved livestock. For high-status families, a child's birthday might be marked with a small household ceremony. The family gathered, a prayer to the god of the child's birth star was offered, and a meal was shared. Sometimes a clay tablet was inscribed to record the occasion. Sometimes the child got a gift, often symbolic, like a miniature chariot or an amulet. In wealthier homes, the celebration might escalate. Neighbors invited, flutists hired, chickpeas boiled in honey, a goat sacrificed in the courtyard, its hide used for a makeshift drum, its bones carved into toys. The circle of life was very literal. And then, of course, the children would reenact their own birth in dramatic fashion. There is, and this is not a joke, a clay tablet showing children pretending to be newborns while others play midwives. One child plays the screaming mother, another shouts, "Push!" with glee. The neighbors applaud. Because nothing says happy birthday like crawling out of a reed basket and being slapped with a palm frond. Messy, sacred, loud. There's a tablet fragment from ancient Kish that reads, "The house is full of shouting, the goat is missing, the bread is burned. All is as it should be." And if that doesn't describe a successful Mesopotamian family gathering, I don't know what does. Children in this world didn't have separate playrooms or quiet birthday parties. Their games were the heartbeat of celebration. Their laughter filled temple courtyards. Their mistakes became proverbs. Their reenactments became oral history. They weren't just tolerated. They were threaded into the fabric of ritual, community, and cosmic chaos. Because in a civilization obsessed with order, from irrigation canals to star charts, children were the glorious exception. Unpredictable, joyful, covered in syrup and chalk dust, practicing to be gods or bakers, or both. In our final installment, we'll follow Mesopotamian children into adolescence, jobs, marriages, what happened when you turned 12, and the bittersweet end of play. Spoiler, it involves taxes. For now, close your eyes. Picture a child with a bird mask, singing loudly, holding a honey cake in one hand and a reed doll in the other. The drums are too loud, the goat is too fast, and the night is still young. Welcome to the party.
We've spun clay tops in played hide-and-seek in the alleys of Lagash, sat through scribal school and danced through Ikitu festivals. But eventually, all childhoods shift. Even in ancient Mesopotamia, the games faded. The toys were put aside, and the once giggling child was handed a new responsibility, adulthood. Or at least, something like it. Because here's the truth. In the cradle of civilization, childhood was brief, adolescence came early, and play, the joyful, chaotic magic of play, slowly transformed into work, marriage, and divine duty. Tonight, we follow the Mesopotamian child through that strange in-between. 1 foot in the game, 1 foot in the ledger. The final chapter begins, the age of expectation. By modern standards, Mesopotamian children grew up fast. At 10 or 11, a boy might already be apprenticing under a craftsman, carving seals, mixing bitumen, helping tally grain. A girl the same age could be learning how to run a household, weave textiles, or negotiate dowries on behalf of her family. Toys didn't vanish overnight, but they quietly disappeared. The clay chariots gathered dust. The board games were replaced by account tablets. The reed dolls were passed down to younger siblings. We even have a word for this transformation, shehu. It meant youth, but it wasn't just a stage, it was a responsibility. And the first sign you'd crossed over, you were expected to stop playing, or at least pretend you'd had. Work as play, play as work. In Mesopotamia, the line between fun and labor blurred early.
A boy helping his uncle bake bricks might still draw little faces in the mud. A girl learning how to run a household might turn her weights into game pieces when no one was looking. Some apprentices carved tiny glyphs onto the corners of serious tablets, secret signatures. Others composed practice riddles disguised as inventory lists. One teenage scribe wrote a complete shopping list in verse. The final item? "And may the gods spare me from more onions." Mood. These weren't just jokes. They were quiet rebellions, echoes of a childhood slipping into the past. Wedge mark by wedge mark. Marriage. The end of play. By age 12 or 13, many girls were betrothed. By 14 or 15, married. Boys usually waited a little longer, often into their late teens or early 20s, but by then, their lives were filled with duty. Fields to plow, tablets to tally, temples to serve. Marriage wasn't just about love. It was economy, politics, family. But within that structure, there was still room for joy. Wedding celebrations were raucous. Feasts overflowed. Dances spilled into the streets. Children, now older, nearly grown, danced beside the adults, sometimes embarrassed, sometimes thrilled, and occasionally, in the quiet moments between rituals, they might sneak away, to toss a clay ball, to spin a top, to remember. Because the body might grow fast in Mesopotamia, but the heart always lingers, leaving a mark literally. One of the strangest, sweetest remnants of Mesopotamian childhood comes in the form of handprints. Yes, handprints. Archaeologists have found ancient bricks with tiny palms pressed into them. Not adult hands, children's hands. Some were clearly accidental. Maybe a child tripped while the mud was still wet. Others seem intentional. A small hand pressed firmly into the clay. A pause. A moment. Was it a game? A joke? Or a message across millennia? I was here. Some of these prints are surrounded by doodles, stick figure animals, spirals, even a crude star. One brick fragment has the faint inscription, "Belonging to Ibisin, son of no one." Was it a joke? A defiant orphan? A kid with too much time and not enough supervision? Whatever it was, it remains. The only thing more permanent than taxes is a child with wet clay and ideas. Inheritance of fun. Even after kids became adults, their childhoods weren't erased. Many returned to their games through their own children. They carved dolls, retold board game rules, sang lullabies older than the ziggurats themselves. In some temples, retired scribes became schoolmasters, passing on jokes, tricks, and insults, just like their masters had. One scribe writes, "I teach with the rod, yes, but also with laughter." Shocking. The Mesopotamian cycle of play, learn, labor, teach, and return was not linear. It spiraled, like a top, like a chant, like time itself. Final nightfall. And so, the sun sets on our ancient playground. We've seen Mesopotamian kids spin tops, mock demons, reenact birth, and write rude poetry about onions. We've watched them walk into temples with wide eyes, then later into adulthood with steady hands. And we've learned, quietly, gently, that play has always been sacred. Not because it's productive, not because it teaches, but because it's human. Whether on an iPad or in the dust of whether in sneakers or sandals, kids play. They always have. They always will. Before you drift off, if you've made it this far, Maybe you've noticed something odd. This wasn't just history. Not really. This was a bedtime story. About you. Because in some way, every game you've ever played, every time you ran, shouted, imagined, echoes with them. With the child who carved a lion into clay 4,000 years ago. With the little girl who wore a bird mask and danced beneath the stars. With the boy who whispered to a toy chariot and prayed it would fly. They're still here. In you. In all of us.